Well, I don't have much money, and I don't have much time, and I don't have many friends I could call mine. And I've been deceived, yeah, but haven't we all? I've seen the sun rise, and I've seen the sun fall. Well, I don't know why, and I don't know where, and I don't even know how, and I no longer care. But I've seen your face, and I've heard your call. Yes, I've seen the sun rise, and I've seen the sun fall. I've seen the sun hang like a flame in the sky. Yes, I've seen the sun turn, and I've seen the sun die. And I often think now, before our time is run, will there be any thoughts for what we have done? Well, I don't have much money, and I don't have much time, and I don't have many friends I could call mine.
Hello and welcome to another SDAQ&A. My very special guest today is Chris Smoot. How are you, Chris?
Fine. How are you, Peter?
I'm terrific, and all the better for having you on the show. I've been watching your comments over quite a while now, I'd say. How long have you been a member of the Facebook group there at
Probably about
SDAQ&A?
6 months, maybe.
Yeah. I noticed your comments and replies, and I thought this guy's got some very interesting insights into the whole thing. I wonder if he's still an Adventist. Has he left the church? He obviously knows all about the church. And I recently reached out to you after one particularly good run of comments that you had there in a conversation with someone, I can't remember who. Because do you know that we average 1,500 comments just inside that Facebook group a week?
That's a lot to keep on top of.
Incredible. I kind of just randomly go through, and I was fortunate enough to come across this particular conversation you were having with someone, and I thought, I've got to get Chris on the program, and I reached out. You were a little bit nervous at first, but I think you've worked through that, and here we are.
Here we are.
Um, when I look at your, shall we say, resume, it becomes apparent that you have a real burden for humanitarian efforts, and I think a real love for helping people that seems to go right back through your whole life. Can you tell us a little bit about who Chris Smoot is and how we got to today?
Okay. Let me start, I guess. I'll start with a brief CV sort of overview, if that's okay to start
Yeah,
there. I'm a product of Adventist education. I am a product of a family who was involved in Adventist education. Um, I'm probably a different kind of PK kid than some PK kids that are listening to the program right now. I was a president's kid, not a pastor's kid.
interesting.
So, as I said, I grew up at Andrews University in Berrien Springs, Michigan. I'm one of the few people that can claim, if you're familiar with the Andrews University campus, I started elementary school in Bell Hall and then moved over to Ruth Murdoch Elementary School and then went over to Academy in Bell Hall for a couple of years and moved over to the new Academy building that was built and then had a couple college classes in Bell Hall. So, quite the product of Adventist education, received an undergrad degree in history, political science, and geography from Andrews. Um, then decided wanted to try to do something a little different. Went to the University of Missouri, Kansas City, got a master's degree in public administration in urban administration. Thought being a city manager might be a fun job to have at some point in life. But ended up initially being a governor's fellow with the state of New Jersey. Worked on the Governor's Council of New Jersey Outdoors. Wasn't a civil servant, so an election was coming up, and I was in the state park service, and so they said you better look for something else. And through a help of a friend, ended up working for the Adventist healthcare system at Hinsdale Hospital. Hinsdale is a suburb of Chicago. It's was one of the original sanitariums. Was an offshoot from, of course, Battle Creek. Dr. Paulson was the founder of it and worked there for 9 years. And then we had a stillbirth while we were there, and I knew I needed to change and do something
Yeah,
and
sorry about
figure
that.
out. Appreciate that. And so, as we were discussing a little bit before, I applied to work for ADRA, not really knowing what ADRA really did, but it sounded cool to do. And and so, after a few go-arounds and talking to people, ended up as the country director in Bangladesh, and worked there for 3.5 years. And it was an interesting time. It was an interesting view of the church that, a Midwestern American kid who had grown up there and had never really thought about it. He had seen the church outside, but had never really experienced how the church operated outside. So that was an interesting time. We can talk more about that. But then my mom had passed away, and that was sort of my connection to Australia. We had meetings in Australia, and we had also taken a vacation there. And the doctor had told me that I needed to go home to visit my mom just before things would not be good. And so I told her, I said, Mom, we can come home. We don't have to go on this trip. We don't, we can all come. And she goes, no, I've always wanted to go to Australia. And so do that for me. Go there and visit for me. So the last time I talked to her was in the Sydney airport, and we talked on the phone. And then I remember walking into the little chapel that was there, and just for some quiet time before we were getting on the airplane and flying back to Bangladesh. And then got the call, and of course we went back for the funeral and that sort of thing. but I knew my dad wasn't doing too well, so I knew it was probably time to move back to the U.S. for a bit at least, and ended up at Andrews University as their director of foundation and corporate relations. So I was a fundraiser. And I also had the seminary as one of the schools that was my school that I had to talk to people about. Did that for a couple of years and still had the itch to go back overseas. And so talked to ADRA again and ended up in Kenya managing the South Sudan program. So it was right at the end of the war. We had 4 locations all throughout South Sudan. So it was quite interesting to, go through all the security stuff that you had to go through to learn all those new skills. And did that for a while and then decided I needed to change again to spread my wings out. Moved over to World Vision. And World Vision is the largest, Christian humanitarian organization in the world. And we ended up in the country of Mauritania. And whenever I said Mauritania, immediately everybody thinks of Mauritius, and it's on the beaches and everything's fine. And I said, nope, it's in the middle of the Sahara Desert. And, in the summer, for those of you that are in the Celsius, it'd be like 45 in the day. And
Wow.
And you'd get that for like 2-3 months straight, and then you maybe get a sandstorm every once in a while.
And is that a dry heat or a humid one?
Well, I always said, it doesn't matter at like 45. It's hot.
It's just hot. Yeah.
It was dry. Yes, it was dry, yeah. But it was an interesting experience.
Oh, I bet.
One, moving to a country where I really didn't speak the language, had to try to pick up French on the fly at an age where my brain didn't want to try to form around French words. Yeah. And it also was a time from a spiritual sort of standpoint. The Seventh-day Adventist Church in Mauritania at the time, there was only 25 people in the entire church.
Wow.
And so there was like one Mauritanian maybe that would show up, but the rest were West African refugees. And there was one other large family, a Nigerian family who worked for the UN. So they had five in their family. And well, I don't know, they had 6 and we had 5. So that made 11 of the 25. So,
wow, the real family church.
It was a really family church. And, each week, you either were teaching Sabbath school or you were preaching or you were doing something. You were sort of actively involved. In a way, it was sort of like being out in the wilderness and going through a wilderness sort of experience, but it was a good time. And then we moved back over to Nairobi because World Vision, my daughter was going to Maxwell Adventist Academy at the time, which was at the time one of the last worldwide schools where missionary kids could go to. And so we moved back and I started working for World Vision Somalia. And before you know it, I was in charge of World Vision Somalia. And so that had a whole lot of, fun times there.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It became another security sort of country for me. And everybody then would say, well, Chris, you must like brown and Muslim. And I said, well, I'm not sure that I like brown and Muslim, but that's the way sort of where I'd been in my career. Did that for a while, but then due to personal reasons and whatever, knew I needed to go home. Again, my dad was doing sort of poorly, starting on his sort of final journey in life. And so went home and started working for the American Refugee Committee in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And eventually became the vice president for international programs there. Had 1,500 people. That was was running day-to-day operations, so fundraising for the organization, security issues, program issues. And of course, all 10 countries were not in the vacation spots of the world. So Pakistan, Syria, I went to Liberia at the end of the Ebola crisis, all those sort of, fun
Did you
vacation
say these
spots.
weren't the vacation spots of the
Yeah.
world? Is that what
Yeah.
I heard you
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. People wouldn't go there. And,
Mm.
then I decided at one point, I wanted to figure out, I'd asked for money most of my life. I wanted to figure out what it was like to give away money. And so I got a job starting up a foundation for a gentleman. And we did funding in the US and a little bit overseas around youth homelessness and youth in the juvenile justice system in the US. So it opened my eyes to a lot of different challenges in the US that, you wouldn't think were there, but were actually there.
Mm.
And then after that, I became a chaplain in a long-term care facility for a while. And so that's sort of the Chris Smoots CV in a nutshell.
Wow. That's quite a CV. And as I said earlier, this desire perhaps is perhaps not the right word, but this urge or focus on helping other people from an organized humanitarian platform, it seems to have permeated your career. Was it something you noticed in yourself even at a younger age when you would be at church and going to Sabbath school? Did you kind of have this sense of, hey, I want to kind of help anyone that's a bit downtrodden?
Um, Probably, yeah, it could be. I can step back a little bit now and sort of look at it and say I probably let my dad down because my dad wanted me to be a PhD in history just like he was and get into the university administration and that sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, but sons don't always do what their fathers want them to do,
yeah. That's true. That's true.
and
Yeah,
so I started on the path. He's very proud for what I did.
yeah.
He'd start. I know he would brag too much on me, so I would tell him to stop it, Dad. It's not. I put one leg of my pants on at the same time. I'm not Superman.
That's good though. I think he obviously was very proud of you, and I think that's important for a father-son bond.
Yeah.
I think at
So
the end of the day, they don't really mind what you do, but that you're actually contributing to the world and doing some good.
so I would say that the journey that I sort of restarted was I came across one of your videos. It was the one where you were interviewing Bill Johnson,
Oh yeah,
William Johnson.
yeah, that
And
one. That's the one that kind of started SDAQ&A into a whole other stratosphere than it had been previously.
it was one that got me started to rethink about where I was, what I was doing, why I was doing what I was doing.
Wow.
Should I change? Should I not change? Um, I had gone to school with Dr. Johnson's kids. Terry, his oldest son, was a year or two ahead of me in academy, and his daughter was a year or two behind me in academy. So I knew the Johnsons, and the last time I had seen him was in Bangladesh. He was on a visit with Elder Falkenberg and one of the very large ASI donors who was funding programs in Bangladesh at the time. And that was a whole story in itself on how it all sort of worked. It wasn't like a papal visit, but it was probably close to a presidential visit. But I'll put it that way, with who was allowed in and who wasn't allowed in, and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
when we got up to when our turn was able to go up to where the meeting or the people were at, I sat down next to Dr. Johnson, and he was like, "Why are you here, Chris?" And we had a very nice conversation, and he wrote a very nice, it's part of his story. He wrote up a very nice little blurb in the review about our conversation. But that conversation got me to think, and it also got me to head to. I'd had his book, this
Oh,
book of
yes.
his,
Yeah.
and I started to reread it. Where Are We Headed?
Yeah.
Adventism After San Antonio.
Yep. I've got that
And
behind me there.
and it saddened me when I read that, because
Mm,
I could see that lots of things, the 10 points he brought up hadn't really changed, and it was kind of frustrating to see. And then and so I started watching, more of your videos, some of Miles Christian's videos, and Academy Apologies, I think it is,
yeah.
videos,
Apologia.
and Apologia. And I started reading, more of the current Adventist history that was coming out. And I picked up Gilbert Valentine's book, The Canaries and the
Ostriches.
Ostriches, which is
Yeah.
the title.
Yeah.
And I'll read this quote that he wrote right at the beginning, which sort of it summed up a lot of what I grew up with, and I'll talk a little bit maybe more about that
Yes, please.
after this. But it said, "Canaries sing beautiful in the sunlight. Their natural habitat, of course, is not really coal mines. Nevertheless, their presence in these old coal mines was essential. But when they ceased to sing, when their voices fell silent, the wise worker at the coal face knew that the real danger was present. The environment had turned toxic. Something was wrong, and survival depended on a response. Just a spark could set off an explosion. Adventist church scholars have often felt like canaries in the coal mine, and Adventist church history has had its share of ostriches. But this is more than a story of Adventist bird life. It's a story of sincere people engaged in a serious struggle for truth and the soul of the church."
Yeah. Wow. That book is a profound book, isn't it?
It,
Gil,
it
yeah.
is.
Gil Valentine.
And of course, we were his story, and so I thought about, you know should I, or what I should do, because I know my dad kept a diary for many, many years. I
Wow.
know I have papers of his. That was right when he was there. And so I wrote to Alex Carpenter. Alex is one of my interns in Adra, Bangladesh,
Oh,
many, many
wow.
years ago.
Oh, wow.
And Alex, we had a great time with Alex.
Great guy.
And so I said, "Alex, do you have a contact for Dr. Valentine?" And he said, "Oh, sure." And before you knew it, I had contact with Dr. Valentine's contact, and we were talking. And I said, "Well, I'm pretty sure I still have all this stuff. Would you be interested?" And it was like, a canary in the starting to sing.
I can just imagine.
Because he's like, your dad was right there, and was sort of the guy who was doing things. Um, and so I'm like, let me think through more and more. And so I guess in a sort of a way, that's been the journey to where this interview is taking place right now.
Wow. Amazing.
That this needs to be more open. And I looked at my dad's career. Both my dad and my mom taught for their professional careers. My mom didn't have a PhD, but my dad had a PhD. He was one of I think one of the first students from Southern Missionary College to get a PhD, even. And so he's always sort of been in the pursuit of knowledge.
Yes.
Now, some people, when they hear me say this, they might scoff a little bit and say, "Well, could ever." There was only one person in our household from a historical perspective that really counted, that just really counted, and everything resolved around Thomas Jefferson,
Interesting.
the American president.
Yes. Wow.
And Jefferson was his sort of ideal of a perfect individual,
What did
even
he
though,
think? What did he think of the Jefferson Bible?
well, he had, here's the Jefferson Bible,
That's so good.
right there.
Yeah. Wow.
Um, he, he, he was always, and what his goal was, I think, with Adventist education was to make sure that there was academic freedom.
Yes.
Academic freedom to him was a real component. And Jefferson was the scholar. Jefferson could play the violin. Jefferson could speak multiple languages. Jefferson's library eventually became the Library of Congress. He was an
Yeah.
architect. He was all this sort of stuff. And that's,
Yes.
what my dad viewed university life to be.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was a kid, Disney World wasn't our summer vacations. We didn't go camping. Camping really wasn't Disney. No, we would go to historical sites and university libraries when I was a kid growing up. That was, my playground became the Gettysburg battlefield or the Antietam battlefield or Williamsburg, Virginia, or
Wow.
some presidential home or, something like that. That's what we did. And then we would go to university libraries and we would walk on university campuses, and that was the sort of impetus how he sort of viewed his life. He started at CUC.
Can you
He
just
was
give
a
me a time period of his kind of career? When did he
Okay,
start and when did he retire? Just so we can get a bit of a sense of when this period is.
and I'll start that. So he went to CUC right after he graduated from the University of Kentucky, Columbia Union College. So that was 1961.
Right.
I was
Wow.
born in Kentucky, lived there for a week, but still claimed to be a proud son of the Commonwealth of Kentucky.
Right.
Um, and he was a history teacher, and he was always the history teacher. I've talked to lots of his students who they loved him. They all said he was the toughest teacher they ever had, but he made them the best students they could be, and he
Yes.
brought the best out of them. And he would do. I have pictures where he would bring um, the Soviet embassy people in to lecture in his class about Marxism.
Wow.
I mean, and you wouldn't think that, an Adventist professor would think sort of like he did, but he did. He also, he was very proud of the rules that he broke sometimes as an Adventist instructor. He uh, he he always loved to tell the story of he had his history students. They had an American flag football team, and it was not like real football, but it was football where they pulled flags instead of hit each other. And of course, as always in Adventist sort of schools, now it's not like it was before. But you would always sort of talk to somebody in another school and say, "Well, our team is better than your team." And of course, Mrs. White, you can't have competition because that was really bad, and so that couldn't take place. So he would always tell the story that somehow he ended up with his history flag ball team at Atlantic Union College, and they knew that he was there, and he was, as he wrote in one of his stories that he wrote, that he was up with the administration telling them why this game would never take place while the game was taking place in the process. Um,
Oh,
but that's sort of the way he was.
yeah. Yeah.
He loved his students. He loved inquiring minds. Um, he was always, he wanted what was best for people.
Yeah.
And so in 1968, we then moved to Andrews University.
And was his name Joseph?
Joseph Grady.
Yes, yeah.
But it
I just
was
wanted to check.
Grady.
I just wanted to check that. Yeah, officially Joseph was his name, but people called him Grady. Is that right?
Right.
Yeah.
Because that's a very secret family tradition that I better not let out.
Right.
because he was from the American South, and in his side of the family and ours, lots of the male members always went by their middle name. So his brothers went by his middle. He went by his middle name, and so I followed into that tradition. I go by my middle name
Right.
instead of my first name. So, he got to Andrews in '68 as the dean of the graduate school, and by '69 he was the vice president for academic affairs, and by 1976 he was president of Andrews University.
Whoa.
And so,
So that's 1976. He was president at Andrews.
right.
Right.
So, all that in all the things that you've read about in Dr. Valentine's book, from that period of, he was a part of helping Dr. Hamill. I remember Dr. Hamill. He was a very kind and nice gentleman. I remember Dr. Murdoch, the dean of the seminary.
Yeah.
He was, again, very kind, very sort of austere Scotsman. He's kind of scary, but he was he was a nice guy.
And just sorry to keep interrupting, but this is the book we're talking about, and how we came up with the title today of growing up a Canary Adventist. And for some reason, the pennies are only really just dropping now as you speak, which I love about this show. I get to kind of join the dots sometimes in real time. So this time period that he's talking about, 1966 to 79, your dad's right in the middle of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, wow. Sorry, carry on. I'm fascinated.
So, some of the things that, he did as president at Andrews, and I also have to appreciate this about my dad, was he sort of like, his door was always open to students and whatever, but he always sort of viewed the student body through me, because I was going through academy at the time and in college and those sort of things. And he knew and wanted to make things better for students. So, some of the things that he was involved in during that time period, a lot of it when he was president, was getting the professional accreditations for programs, across the university wide opened up. He created the first strategic master plan for the university. So where buildings were built, where they weren't built, what they were going to, where they were going to go, what they weren't going to do. The first capital campaign of the university's history he started, again, to raise money. Doctoral programs got started. He got the full accreditation of the PhD program there. He helped to develop, was a major player in the Adventist worldwide affiliated program of higher education. So, if you went to seminary in Nigeria, you got an Andrews University MDiv degree.
Right.
If you went to Mayagüez University in Puerto Rico, whatever the Andrews program was, that's what you got. So this whole worldwide affiliation is where you basically, that's where that all got started up. He was also one of the founders and helped create the University of Eastern Africa in Kenya, in Bariton University. That's there. He helped start the Andrews University Press for scholarly sort of work, scholarly journals and printing and books and that sort of thing, because he knew, university needs to print out knowledge and that sort of thing. Started the Institute for Prevention of Addictions, which was something that as I think back to it now, what I've read a little bit about his thinking, was kind of different. Adventists really didn't want to think about addictions,
Yeah.
at that stage of the game. Organized the School of Business, School of Education. So, I grew up in a household where intellectual thought was there, it was challenged. I mean,
Mm.
I'm an only child, and so we would sit around the table at dinner or whenever, and we might be talking about the age of the earth sometimes. I know people
Yeah.
might find it, oh, how could you do this when you were a kid?
Yeah.
It's just the way it worked in our family.
Yeah.
um
I love it.
and I also knew, and this is probably challenging. I also knew the problems with Mrs. White from a very early age. I can't recall well, let me just say it this way. One of the, I think one of the deals that some Adventist kids who grew up in leadership families get is their parents are willing to say stuff in front of them if the kids are smart enough to not say stuff out to their friends, and oh, I know,
Yeah.
that sort of thing.
Yes.
And I'm not, I can't remember conversations in detail, but one of the things that he used to love to do was go on walks on Friday evening with our dog. And Dr. McAdams was one of his mentees, was, his good friend.
Wow.
And so Dr. McAdams would walk his dog, and sometimes I would have the privilege to be allowed to walk along,
Oh,
just
what?
sort of listening.
Yeah.
And when you look at his book, with this one, of course,
The yes.
Ellen White,
Yeah. I highly recommend that book.
those conversations took place.
Wow. How old would you
And
have been at that point? So this is mid 70s.
I would have been 11, 12 years old.
See, a lot of McAdams, so 11 or 12, right? A lot of the McAdams revelations he kind of sat on early on.
Mm-hmm.
And it was people like Walter Ray who kind of later ran with a lot of the information that I think he probably was getting from McAdams.
Potentially, yeah.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that Don was.
Hello? 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 Oh, good to hear. I'm still good. Okay. That's a good one. Well, I guess we're not going. It's my show now. I don't know whether to continue, folks, or just to stop. Thunderstorm. Not here in Florida. I live in Florida, so it's cool outside. Okay, continue along then. I'll go ahead and I'll go ahead and. So I think growing up in that sort of environment, it allowed me to be more of a free thinker. It allowed me more to question things. And I don't know if that helped or hurt my Adventism, but it did show me that there was a challenge to where the church was going with what it was doing. I mean, growing up as a kid, I got baptized at 12 years old, as probably lots of you did. And it was the typical, they're coming to get you. If they don't, if you don't sign up on the dotted line and, become a church member, well, then, bad things are going to happen to you and you're going to be in trouble and, it's not going to work. So that was a hard, thing as I thought about it through growing up as an Adventist. Sorry, I'm reading the comments, sort of. I shouldn't probably read the comments and just talk. That was sort of a hard thing to deal with in later life because you sort of, well, is this really how I wanted to see how it was with my experience with Christ? But I went through that. Did I have personal challenges? Sure. As a kid growing up, I can remember, as I said, life growing up in Berrien Springs, from what I remember, was sort of a great life. If any of you have grown up in an Adventist environment, it's a great life. And one of the things that always found interesting was, as a kid growing up, for those of you that are American and know the sport of baseball, there is, I'll click the link again. Okay, let me try the link again here.
I think we're back.
Oh, I was just talking. Everybody told me, go ahead and keep talking.
So people could still see you.
It's your show. Go ahead. Yeah. Peter's been raptured. So I thought Peter's been raptured, then we're in trouble.
Oh, look, I'm glad you kept talking. My end was kicked off, and so what did I miss? For me, we were at this cliffhanger moment where I'm penny dropping that your dad was bang there, President Andrews, in the middle of the kind of the ostriches and canaries era, and that you were just getting to go along with walks with Don McAdams and your dad and listen into some of this Ellen G. White stuff.
Yeah,
that must have been quite shaking, perhaps, for both of them.
I never. There's one lesson I always said I would never do is write my dad's biography like Arthur White did of his grandmother, and write everything to be perfect or make sort of judgments.
Sure.
I would say though, I don't think it shook him per se, because I think he accepted it from a historical standpoint.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I mean, he had done research into Jane Andrews, and he was not a very happy camper. That comes out in books, I think, that have been written, like the 1922 book, or when they're talking about Jane Andrews in the church. And, Mrs. White wrote some Mrs. White and James White wrote some very harsh stuff to Jane Andrews. And it wasn't, that bothered him quite a bit. It bothered him quite a bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was, I don't know if I should just hold on for a moment.
Yeah, and while you're doing that, those who are watching, thanks for sticking with us there. I'm loving our conversation. And if there's any question you would like to ask Chris about this particular era, please do in the comments, and we'll try and bring them up as well, because I think it's such an important era to look at. And I'm so thankful for people like Gil Valentine and McAdams and Casebolt for writing this material.
I don't know, Peter, if you've ever seen this.
It's back the front. It's in mirror image. So maybe read out the title for us.
It's Jane Andrews, The Man and the Mission. It's published by Andrews University Press, and it was sort of papers they did when they were doing a symposium on Jane Andrews. And my dad contributed one article, and I can try to read. So, people like Dan Augsburger, I don't know if that name's familiar to some of you, Pietro Lopez, R.F. Cottrell, Ron Graybill.
Wow.
A lot of these that they produced about Andrews, the life his. And I think this is, of course, Dr. Valentine did a biography
book as well. Yeah.
Book. So that
I wonder if that one's available online anywhere.
You can try to find out. I'm trying to look. It was published in 1985.
Right.
By the Andrews University Press. Jane Andrews, The Man and the Mission.
Right. Right.
My dad's article is the first one in. So,
well, I'd love to try and get a hold of that. What was the title again? I'm just going to write it down so I can look later.
J.N. Andrews, The Man and the Mission.
Right. So I've missed a little bit that I think you carried on talking about.
So yeah, I mean, you were talking about the shaking, sort of.
Yeah.
And I was talking about, I got baptized at 12, like everybody else.
Yeah.
Probably did.
Yeah, me too, at 11. Yeah.
And you were sitting there. I mean, the baptismal process at the time was, if you don't sign up, the bad guys are going to come and get you.
Yeah.
And when they come and get you, they're going to pull your toenails out.
Yeah.
And life's going to be really bad for you. But if you do this, you got the ticket. And if you get the ticket, even though it might hurt, it's going to be okay.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Hey, just before I forget, that is online.
Okay.
And the complete book is there available online. You just need to go to the AdventistArchives.org. Just search that title and it will come up, and the whole complete book is there. So that's I'm going to read that later today. And your dad's written the first chapter there.
So there's one. I always loved Jesus, but in the back of this sort of and I didn't even, I mean, now I've heard, the great controversy theory, or, that sort of thing on how Adventism sort of, I didn't think about it at that time, but it was like, I knew that there was, from the Adventist scholarship sort of standpoint, that there was a challenge about Mrs. White.
Yeah.
And I knew that she wasn't at times, wasn't the pleasant sort of lady that everybody said.
Yeah.
She was.
And she left Willie
Well,
White, with another family for the first 5 years of his existence.
Yeah.
She traveled. Yeah. Carry on.
And so there was, I mean, again, my dad had done some research, and I remember him saying, well, the Whites had marriage problems, and, there were some bad financial investments, and, the Whites would sort of snipe back at each other at times, in their relationship wasn't the rosiest that it was portrayed to be. So yeah, I guess that was a challenge, but I stayed true, because in a way, I think that's the challenge with a lot of kids that grew up in Adventism at the time is, if your parents were attached to the church and employed by the church, well, if they were to say something, they probably could have lost their job. If you messed up for them, that caused them problems.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of fishbowl pressure, sort of, as when you were in a leadership family sort of position.
Yeah. I think you and I must be a similar age. My dad was a lecturer up here at Avondale, more late 60s, early 70s. So I might be a bit older than you. But my neighbours were Norm Young, Dr. Magnuson, Lyndon Rogers. And I'm just feeling a little bit of what you're feeling, or what you might have felt, where some of this stuff, but strangely it seems to sit well also. Like, you almost feel like, oh, I've got some inside information here and it's a bit controversial, but we can make it work, kind of thing.
No, well, you have to make it work. If you don't make it work, then if you're a kid in that situation, and those at that time, and you were in trouble. I mean, I remember as a kid, and I met Neil Wilson at one of the general conferences.
Yeah,
that was over. I mean, I would meet these people because they would either come to our house for Sabbath lunch, or you'd be at meetings, and so it was like no big deal to meet Neil Wilson or to meet people.
Yeah,
it was the way that it was
of life, part of the fabric of your existence.
And so I think that then, with a lot of Adventists today, that's sort of that cultural sort of comfortability of living in the little bubble that was so nice.
Yes.
But I was telling, I was going to launch into a story about, the first time I had to stand up for the Sabbath. And, you felt really good about it in a way, but you also felt pretty bad about it. In America, we have baseball as a sport. And when you're kids, you play Little League. So, like, if you're 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, you get to play Little League baseball. And again, it was one of those things that I found interesting, how, because all the Adventist kids were separated from all the towny kids. In Berrien Springs, we were sort of always referred to as the Peanuts. And the town people were on the other side. But when it came to sports, and the townspeople started to see how good the Adventist kids were in sports, they all sort of fought over them to play on their teams and that sort of thing. So in Little League, I played Little League. I played first base in Little League and got to be pretty good at it. Again, my parents would have wished that I would have practiced the piano more and been a better pianist, but I wasn't that. I wanted to be a first baseman, and I made the all-star team for the town, for Berrien Springs,
Wow.
and we had to play against
Oh.
Bridgman, which was a town, another village, right sort of up on Lake Michigan. And the first game was on Sabbath, and the next game I think was a Sunday. And I couldn't play. I couldn't even show up at the game in a uniform.
Mm.
Now I knew my parents, you know, I mean, it just wasn't going to happen. And so that happened, and the next day I went to the next game, and the coach said, "Well, you can't play today because you didn't play in the first game."
Wow.
So there I sat in my uniform for the full game, but at the end, shook hands with did everything. But it was sort of like, did you feel good about protecting the Sabbath?
Yeah.
Or did you feel like, man, as a kid, I wish I could have played?
Yeah.
And he sort of took it out on me because I wasn't there for the first game. And, and funny, we had to deal with that many years later with our kids when they played
with your own kids. Yeah.
My own kids.
And how did you deal with it with your kids when they played sports?
Didn't have a problem with it. Thought it was okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had I think I've had one or two of my kids play for the Andrews University women's basketball team. You know, go play.
That's
go
great.
play those heathen Catholic schools in Wisconsin and all that sort of stuff. And I guess, Peter, that's the one point too I'd like to get to is I hear what you're saying in regards to the gospel, liberal, whatever term you want to use.
Yeah.
Think they could change the church in some way, shape, or form. And I've always thought through the years that the church on social issues has gradually changed and morphed and changed and done things because they want to seem like they're part of the world, but they're not really part of the world. I mean, we all grew up, you know, at least I did. One of my favorite sandwiches for lunch in elementary school was Apple Valley Market used to do round bread, round sprouted wheat bread. And you would have mayonnaise, and you'd have your lettuce, and then you'd have your mock chicken piece or two, and maybe a couple a piece of cheese, or you'd have your wham, or you'd have your beef, you know, whatever. And then maybe on the weekends, you could get some linkettes, and you could get the I forget what they call the bacon strips now. It's slipping my mind. But
I know what you mean.
It's we've done all these things so that we can sort of be like the world, but not of the world.
Yes.
But the question is why have we done that? And gradually it's changed. I mean, I grew up where, you know, you could never play competition. You'd never even think that Adventist schools would be in competition with each other and with other schools. And I've had kids, like I said, play on the Andrews University women's basketball team. You know, I've gone to games. They played on the soccer team or the football team, you know, whatever you want to do that. And it's like, I think the church has started to move through the years in a direction that they say one thing to the membership, but yet then you have Elder Wilson saying things in sermons, and you have the Fulcrum 7 people and their sort of media say certain things, and you sit in Sabbath school classes and you hear, you know, the world's only 6,000 years old, and you're sitting there reading Mrs. White quote after Mrs. White quote, and the two just don't jive in my mind anymore.
Yeah.
There's no jiving. I remember talking with a pastor friend of mine, I think after San Antonio, who was really just heartbroken about the female ordination issue. I mean, just heartbroken. And we were sitting there eating, and he was telling me, pouring his heart out about it. And I said to him, I said, what made you think it was actually going to pass?
Say that again.
I said, what made you think that it was actually going to pass?
Exactly.
I said, it was never going to pass.
No,
He
I
goes, well,
agree.
how did you know that? I go, well, one, I've served overseas, and I know how it works with some of the overseas church units, and it's just not gonna go because the church isn't gonna support it.
Yeah.
So I think we do these things where, as a church, on one hand we say, yep, this is okay to do, or we're doing it, we're changed to do this, but yeah, on the other hand, we're saying, nope, can't do this. This is not going to work. Can't go there. That's bad. That we're not going to do that anymore. And that can be incredibly frustrating to a lot of people. And I think it's one reason why I think a lot of people, maybe they don't leave the church sometimes for theological, but they just leave because they can't stand the hypocrisy of it anymore. They're just not going to deal with it. I mean, I maybe I've started to get off track a little bit.
No.
in what I'm saying. I know through my life that I've experienced a lot of things. And let me just to close off sort of my dad's stuff on Andrews. This is one quote from him that he always loved. He said, or that he quoted, education is the key to preparing for an interesting and productive life. And I think that's what he wanted Adventist higher education to be, preparing kids for an interesting, productive life. And I can read you some things that he wrote about how he defined what a productive life would be. But that's what it was. I mentioned about Jefferson. The other person that I would say historically that he would follow and he would preach on constantly. He did not move away. He would preach from the Gospels of Paul. He stayed in Paul. Paul was his cornerstone, his sort of thing. And he would quote, when he went to college, Kenneth Wright, who was the president of Southern Missionary College at the time, he was there. Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ, which strengthens me. And that's what, he just sort of, that's where he went to, and where he could accomplish what if he had Christ in his life and he was doing things to help people. That's what was important to him. And I think those are the values you asked earlier. Where did my humanitarian stuff come from?
Yes.
I think that's where it came from. Seeing that on a regular basis. One of the stories he was most proud of is there was a Andrews University employee who was in charge of an area, and it was a female, and her husband had health issues, couldn't work, and so she wasn't paid like head of household, like the way the pay structure used to be, because it was always going to be a man. Man was the head of the household. It wasn't ever going to be, female. And he fought and he fought and he got her to be head of household. And that's what, it was that fight for the good of people. Always be there to help people. That's your role in life, Chris. That's where you head to. That's where you go. Always help people. And so I think that's what sort of, outlined him and what he believed.
Yeah. When did he pass away?
2018.
So not that long ago.
No.
What year were you born? Do you mind me asking?
1961. So I'm probably a little older than you.
No, only 1 year. No. Only 1 year older. Yeah, I just got this feeling that we were very, very similar age generation, just with the experiences and the things you're saying. And my dad also was born in 1932, and he's just turned 92, so he's still going strong. But
if
yeah,
you don't mind, I can read some things if you don't mind.
I'd love it. Yeah, love it.
This was from his. I'll read just a part of it. This is from his favorite sermon, and it was a sermon that he called "To Live Is," and he preached it off Philippians 1:21. And he said, Paul made his declaration in prison that began with the words, "For to me," in Philippians 1:21. In the final analysis, living is an individual matter. We do not live as a group, even though we live in families in a society of people. We must make a declaration as to what seems to us to be reality. We must speak for ourselves. Failure to address the questions of life personally does not leave it unanswered. Non-commitment in itself is a commitment to the forces we do not recognize. Paul's statement was about his life. He came to grips with his condition and faced the issue squarely. He said, "For me to live is," indicating that he had located the main switch. We can take control of our lives. We have confronted life and won. Living is more than breathing, eating, or moving about, although it is surely that as a concept of this word suggests. Ultimately, living is a recognition of our spiritual yearnings, an answer of life beyond us in an admission to our own origins, a statement about our destiny. It is far more than a question dangling in meaningless, opaque universe in an absurd condition without cognizance of our circumstances. Paul's definition of life centers not on the human self, but on God. He said, "For me to live is Christ." He did not say that for me to live is Paul. Hannah Smith, the God of all comfort, describes Moses' experience with God and wanting to know what is his name. That was the title she gave the chapter. In giving his name, I Am, God revealed over and over again through the pages of his book that I am all that my people need. I am their strength. I am their wisdom. I am their righteousness. I am their peace. I am their salvation. I am their life. I am their all in all. If we would know these things, we would find them in Christ. He is the completion of the name I Am, the God of all comfort. What does one mean to say to live as Christ? Christ lived a life of sacrifice. He chose to think of others first. He taught that forgiveness cannot be counted in human reckoning. He demonstrated the sword should not be used to defend ourselves, even though it may be used against us. He revealed that prayer is the power that makes living possible in the deepest sense of the word. He told us to love our neighbors and help them in their needs. He stated the truth that giving is more rewarding than getting. Loving is better than hating, and that living for others is the best way to live for ourselves. Paul's statement to me to live as Christ sometimes may seem out of character in our day, or so we reason. Some ask one, try to live a Christian life? What does a Christ-like life mean in our day? With the norms of life centering on the material marvels of our world, the good life of pleasing ourselves often ignores Christ. I ask you, as being a Seventh-day Adventist, relevant today? What does your life and mine say? Is the Sabbath that Christ kept remembered in such a way as to honor him, who is the Lord of the Sabbath? In the light we live, is the Advent detectable at all? Are we deluding ourselves and misleading others with our lifestyle centered on the comforts of our day? Do we want to see the world without warning those who we meet around the globe? Do we love generally but rarely a specific person in need? Paul really wanted to live. He wanted to visit the people of Asia. He wanted to smell the salt air, the sea, and the wind. He found that life was a thrill because he had lived it in Christ. The depth of experience in life has been the theme for millions of words, yet he recognized the inevitable eventuality of death.
Wow. So that's what your dad wrote and shared in a sermon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Paul was very important to him.
Yeah.
I can move it right. If you see the painting that's up the wall, not very good. That is it's a reproduction Rembrandt of Paul that hung over his desk at Andrews.
Wow. So that Paul, his teachings, how he carried out his ministries to his different churches was a key component to your dad's outlook.
Yeah. Yeah.
Has it been for you as well?
Yeah, I guess, Peter, what I would say, my life changed when I started working for ADRA. Because at that point, I started to read the Bible differently. I think if you're a Christian humanitarian worker, you start to read the Bible much differently and what it's all about. Because it boils down to love God and love your neighbor.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you love God and love your neighbor, that then means, you got to do certain things. Now, again, I'm not saying that you have to go overseas and work in the worst place to help, other people, but you can help your neighbors.
Yeah.
As an example, where we live, the neighbor next door lost her job, and so she didn't have power and water. So she came over one day sort of sheepishly and said, "Can my kids get showers in your house?"
Yeah.
Which is, sure, no problem.
Yeah.
She goes, "Well, I'll pay you for it." We go, "No, don't worry about that."
Yeah.
So it can be as simple as something like that to, where I was coordinating millions of dollars of daily programming in multiple countries to make sure that we were doing helping people out, whether it was they needed better health care, whether they needed better education, whether they needed better economic development opportunities, whatever it is. So, that's where, to me, it changed. And so I would also say that's where, again, this is probably a harsh thing to say. That's where, the relevance of the theology of Adventism starts. Who cares?
Yeah, it starts to thin away. Yes.
It's like, who cares?
Yeah.
I mean,
I hear you.
You start reading. I mean, one of the stories you hear quite often in the Christian development worker context. I don't know if you know the name Jim Wallace. He's a liberal Protestant theologian.
I've heard the name.
He's very much he's out there in social gospel issues, social justice issues too. And when he was in divinity school, he and some of his classmates decided they were going to cut out all the verses of the Bible that dealt with social justice and economic development and helping people and that sort of thing. And it ended up to be over 2,000 verses.
Wow.
So they said they had the Holy Bible, and what they meant by the Holy Bible was they cut out all the verses that dealt with that. And so when I was with World Vision Somalia, one of the things we did at Christmas as a Christmas gift for everyone was my staff. I got this Bible, the Poverty and Justice Bible,
right,
that World Vision had put together, and it had taken sort of from Jim Wallace's concept. So if you go through this, you'll see like page orange, and page after page you will see social justice, economic development, helping out the poor, the needy in the Bible, time and time again.
Yes.
And again, that's where the cross at that point became a vertical and horizontal for me.
Yeah.
Vertical in my relationship with God, but horizontal looking out to the world that was on both sides.
Yes.
And again, I mean, God bless those who like to read Mrs. White, and that wasn't me. I mean, I changed from that sort of Adventist. Do I agree with all the people that say, well, it's in the fundamental beliefs, and if you sign up to the fundamental beliefs, I never believed. I think I wrote to you once that I never believed that you had to have your baptismal card at the gates of heaven,
Yeah,
and that Peter would say, "Oh, you don't have it. See you later."
yeah,
We would have some conversations with my non-Adventist Christian friends when I was in World Vision, and they would always, a couple of them who sort of knew this issue within Adventism would sort of tease me to say, "Well, Chris, when we get to heaven, you Adventists are going to be off on one side. There's going to be a wall all around you because you guys think you're the only ones going to heaven.
yeah.
And so we're going to let you be happy and think
I
that you're
think
the
you're
only
the
ones
only ones there.
in heaven with the walls and all around, while the rest of us will be on the other side of the whole thing." And it was like, yes, Dave,
Yeah,
you're totally right. And that's where, and I know this, God bless all the Seventh-day Adventist apologists that want to protect and defend that version of Adventism. But I don't do that. That's not me anymore. It's
yeah,
not been me for quite a while.
yeah. I think it sounds like at an early age or stage of your career where you were outputting your gifts to the community, and you were always focused on that, the many aspects of the Bible that teach you to love your neighbor as yourself, help your neighbor. And I think when you focus on that, that makes a lot of the other content pale in some ways. I interviewed, do you know Paul Gredick? Sorry, not Paul Gredick. Paul Rankin, who was quite high up there with ADRA here in Australia, and now he runs now what we call an op shop, an opportunity shop, secondhand store run by ADRA, and it's 5 minutes down the road from me here, and it is massive. It is like 2 football stadiums in size, or maybe one football field, and he is a part of a team that is daily giving out food, clothing, providing places to stay, helping community. And I did an interview with him sometime in the last 12 months. And that, what you've just said, came to the fore of the conversation, where, when you're really focusing on these things, whether Ellen White said Christ was wearing a Levitical robe or not, and beginning his, investigative judgment in October 22, 1844, it becomes less important. And for the people being helped, whether they are being helped by ADRA or a Mormon charity group, they don't care about that stuff.
Right.
They're just glad to have another meal on the table, So
well, and in theory,
ahead.
as a Christian development professional, you're not supposed to create rice Christians. You're not supposed to say, oh, you have, to get the aid, you have to become Christian. You can't.
No.
That's going over the line of what you can do and what you can't do.
Exactly. And you know what? I think anybody that is a thinking person, a caring person, someone that values community, ultimately it comes down to these very things we're talking about as being the most important. What interests me is it valuable to even have the conversations that, for example, we have on SDAQ&A, where there can be quite robust and heated conversations about some of these things? I get a lot of people say, it doesn't matter, stop categorizing, stop talking about this, just get on with your life, just enjoy your community, and I'm fortunate to be able to do those things as well as have the robust conversations. So I guess I'm asking, is there a place for challenging Ellen White's authority? Is there a place for those conversations that can do some good?
Oh, I think, yeah. I mean, I would agree that you need to challenge everything about the way the church operates. You know, Bill Johnson, in the book we talked about before, one of his things, you know, how the church is going to face a reckoning with because of the finances, you know, where things are going with the finances. And I can remember I shouldn't say. We were back in Nairobi and we were going to church out of Maxwell. And they had just had the division people. I don't know if you have anybody who has seen that plot of land. The school sits beneath, and then they built this beautiful headquarters for the East Central Africa Division.
No,
with housing for staff, and which again leads to all sorts of interesting questions like, why would you vote against, you know, your leaders, because you're not going to live in this really nice house.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
that you get. And so we were sitting there, and the teacher was teaching. And I forget what the lesson was even about, but I remember I should have kept my mouth shut, because he looked at me and he was like, "Oh, Smoot, I'm going to give it to you when we're by ourselves." I said, and I think it was the division education guy was there. And I said, you know, well, why should we have so many Adventist schools? Wouldn't it be better that if we put our kids in public schools? Because aren't we told by Mrs. White that it's the parents' responsibility to bring their child up in the faith and to do this? And so why am I sending my kid to an Adventist school that costs probably way more than what a local school costs? And boy, the room, that class got really silent. Really fast, got really silent.
I can just imagine. That's quite a stirring the pot moment.
I was working for World Vision, so, you know, I could always say, well, I'm just a layman of the church, so, you know, I'm just happy to, you know, help out. But no, I think if we don't question where we're going, I mean, I can tell you another example. Again, with numbers, Bill Johnson talks about numbers. I was elected by my church as a member of the Triennial Council. So, you know, where you would go vote all sorts of issues. And this is one conference in the U.S. We sat in the morning. We were told that the conference baptismal numbers were up, that we'd seen growth in the church, and everybody was happy, and everybody said amen. It was all great. And then we had to vote in the president and the secretary treasurer for another term of office, which they did, and they got into the office. And then in the afternoon, we were then told, well, due to people leaving the state and deaths in the church, we're actually at a negative number total overall. And you're like, come on, guys, you can be more transparent than that. You know, you can be honest and say, well, you know, when it all said and done, and you throw all the numbers in, we're really, you know, not doing well. So then we got back, and our church was trying to figure out there where we were at, and you know, we were looking at the membership, and we were trying to figure out how to deal with the people that didn't show up to church, and whether they were actually members or they were not actually members. And so we did a little bit of figuring and talking, and we came up with there was probably about 100+ names on the list, and a good number of them, you know, 80+ never showed up to church. We didn't even know how to contact them. We didn't even know where they were. So, you know, the pastor and I talked, and I said, well, you know, you just need to call the conference up and ask what we would do if we would just take these names off the book. Which, you know, you should, because you can't, you know.
Yeah, 100%.
So he called the conference up. He called me a few days later, and he said, well, the conference wasn't too keen on that.
Yeah, of course not.
because if we do that, then they're going to lose. They're never going to have. It's going to take them years to have a positive membership growth. If just you do your church, let
Wow.
alone the other churches in the conference do the
Yeah.
same thing, which they probably could. You know.
Yeah. Imagine the Adventist Church doing that globally.
Yeah, and you're just sitting there going,
Wow.
why can't we be transparent?
Yeah.
And this is coming, this is coming from a guy. I will say, I have been a deacon in the church. I have been head elder of 2 churches. I have been an elder in the church. I have been a school board chairman in a church. So I think I have a pretty good feel for how the local church sort of operates, let
Yeah.
alone how the world church sort of operates, and from what I saw growing up as a kid, and if we could just be honest
And transparent. Yeah.
honest and transparent, that would make a whole lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like I said, for me personally, once I went overseas and started doing development work,
It just didn't matter anymore.
it just
Yeah.
you get into ADRA, and immediately your prophet becomes Nehemiah.
Yes. Yes.
That's where you preach from.
Yeah.
You preach. I'm a repairer of the walls.
Yeah.
I'm moving forward. I'm not letting anybody bother me.
And I'd like to think that both matter and that both can live side by side. And as you mentioned, the cross example, where there's the this way up of the cross and there's the beam going this way, at some point there is a moment in the center where I think can be a place where you can say to your local conference, hey, how about being more transparent? Let's take the names off the books of people who aren't coming anymore. Or, hey, what was going on with Ellen White and the Food for Worms video? Can we talk about that while simultaneously being able to go, none of it matters? How can I help my neighbor?
Right.
That's what I would prefer. But what I'm finding is a lot of people grind into just the dissident behavior, or they plow into, hey, I don't want to see all that. They kind of become the ostrich, the head in the
Yeah.
and sometimes we think people with the head in the sand are those who don't want to look at the theological expansiveness of the topic. But really, it can be even those very people who are open-minded with their theology. That any sign of, hey, don't shake my church, don't shake my head, they put their head in the sand, stop talking about it. They can equally drill out the ad hominem attacks or roll out the ad hominem attacks in I think ineffectual ways. And I think one of the things I've liked about your comments in the Facebook group is that you do balance that. I've seen you ask some really confronting questions of people, but I also see that your focus is on helping your neighbor, that you have worked out a way to balance the two. I like that. I think that's important.
Well, and again, I'm some things I'm trying to protect because I don't want to come down on people too hard, but I don't know how to get around this one. But again, I'll give you another story about a church I was at, and it was a church I was the head elder of, and we were talking about evangelism stuff, and I got the pastor, because we had evangelism funds, I got him to hire a grad student in the MSA program I think it was at Southern. I think she was at Southern, to come up and to do a community assessment for us. Because the church where we attended was on a piece of property that was next to a 6-lane highway. We had our sign. Thousands of people drove by this every single day. And every single day they saw the church just sitting there absolutely empty. And I said, and this caused some of the dear old brethren of the church to be not very happy with me. And I'd only told the pastor too, I'm only going to do a head elder for 2 years. That's it. I'm not going to do any more because I know how this is going to end. I've been there and done that. I know how this is going to end. I said, what if we thought about selling our church property that we have here and taking the money, then reinvesting it and buying like a strip mall. And then you could start up like a daycare center. You could start up a health outreach. You could have church in, what used to be either a department store or,
have a nice cafe there as well.
And you have everything and have a, when I was like, you would have thought Chris is just like preaching heretical doctrine to some people.
Yeah.
But I mean, until we know how to reach out to the community and to deal with the community on a day-to-day, whether it's your neighbor, whether it's your community, whatever it is, they aren't going to care.
Exactly.
Because they have options to go to. They have places to go to, other churches that do way more than what we do as a focused sort of thing as Adventist.
Yeah.
I mean, the town we lived in the state where we lived, and this will say lots of things, which I probably shouldn't say, but oh well. I'm feeling it maybe more than I should. We lived in the town where the Pathfinder camp, the International Pathfinder Camporee used to be. And I can tell you how much we begged as a local church, the conference, to come up with some sort of a strategic plan as to what we were going to do to really invest in the community if they wanted the community to hear Jesus. And the International Camporee at the time, there was almost 60,000 Adventists attending. The best they came up with was a door-to-door leaving, pamphlets or talking to people with pamphlets. That's what you're like, that's not going to work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Our church ended up staffing, they had a dental medical stuff. Our church ended up staffing that, but again, it's we don't. There's so much you can do when you go meet people right at their need.
Exactly. Yeah.
And until we come to grips with that, it doesn't matter, whether we talk. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And two, I think, and sorry that I'll get this point in, is, and I know from living in Bangladesh and watching how the church sort of operated. I mean, to get a Muslim to convert to be a Christian, let alone an Adventist, which is, Christian, they had to give up basically everything.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
They gave up their family. They gave up their life, their job opportunities. They gave up everything.
Yeah.
So ask yourself the same question in let's say modern day America, where we're at right now.
Yeah.
If somebody were to convert to Adventism, you're asking them to basically change their entire life.
Yes.
And are people willing to do that?
And is it healthy? And conversely, sometimes people see what I'm doing as asking Adventists to leave and change their whole life, which I'm not doing. But for someone to leave Adventism is a massive change as well.
Oh, sure, yeah.
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 But back to what you were saying there, and Dave Wilmoth writes on our Facebook group, with the present state of the world, the prime function of religion is in the role of Good Samaritan. The labels mean nothing. And I think that's a good point. And I think if the Adventist church could propel itself or engage with or merge and blend in with the society on the ground where it's at, without this deep desire behind in the background to proselytize, but rather just to give and support and feed and clothe. I think that leans back into what you're saying about the authenticity and openness. Instead of worrying about the numbers, instead of worrying about the proselytizing, the winning people into the fold, and just focusing on the feeding, the clothing, the supporting, the helping people with mental health issues with no agenda. I just think that would be such a powerful movement. But it's so difficult to not see the puppet strings going on behind the scenes. We'll do this so we can maybe get more members in that part of the world.
Right. Yeah. That's
which is so not what Paul or Christ focused on.
no, you're right. They didn't. And it's a sad place sometimes to live in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because there's so much we could do. I mean, again, and I found in my life too that I've been confronted in so many situations where some people have wanted me to defend what they believe, and that's not even Adventism. it's God has placed me sometimes, Peter, in some situations where I just shake my head and go, why am I even, here? and it's just there was one case in World Vision Days where World Vision has a day of prayer every October 1.
Yeah.
Where all the offices shut down and everybody prays for the, they'll either do a couple day session or whatever, however they work it out. And I remember that one of my staff members got up and he was offering a thanks to God that he was almost going to be a Catholic priest, but somehow God saved him and he became a Christian.
Right.
Now, I had Catholic staff.
Yeah.
Oh, that's,
it's like,
and you're sitting there going, and I was sitting across the room from my operations director, and he was I guess an evangelical free Presbyterian from Northern Ireland.
Wow.
And I just looked across, and we had a very good friendship relationship. We could work well together. And I remember I turned my head like the minute it came out, and he turned his head and he looked at me and like, oh, brother Chris, you're going to have to figure this one out.
Yeah.
So so again, when we started, I remember I had to get up, and here was the Adventist boy who was brought up with the mark of the beast in the Catholics.
I know.
666. And all of a sudden, I had to be the defender of the faith.
Yeah.
I had to say, well, that's probably not the best and how we did. And there's just been time after time like that. When I was a chaplain, or an intern chaplain, I would never say that I was a chaplain because chaplains do very hard work, and I tried to do my best in learning. And it was a group of 4 of us, and 2 of them were evangelical Lutherans, and from the main evangelical, and there was another Lutheran from the Missouri Synod, and there was me. And the Missouri Synod is a very conservative branch of Lutheranism, and the evangelical was the liberal. And he was going after them because we had to do like a paper on our theological beliefs. And he was going after them that, they believed, I think it was women's ordination, gay ordination. I think the evangelical Lutherans do that too. And he was just wrong. And he looked at me, goes, Chris, you're a Seventh-day Adventist. You believe what I believe, don't you?
Oh.
And I'm like, oh Lord, how am I going to answer this one?
Isn't that interesting, though, that you have to go through these mental gymnastics to do something that seems quite simple, just help people?
Right.
There's a church group. I've had a lot to do with Protestant groups with my music since, for 30, 40 years. Um, and so I just noticed by comparison the mental gymnastics Adventists go through as they're doing outreach, and the ones that the local Anglican Church, Episcopalian, the Baptists, whatever, and it's a different game. They have their problems, they have their flaws,
Mhm.
they have their corrupt leaders, they have all those things.
Right.
But Adventists have this big headspace that is all about outreach, and partly because they are commissioned, they've been entrusted with this special end times job to bring people into the fold, to not just to have a better life, but to be saved. That the other denominations don't really struggle with. And there's a church group just down near where I have one of my businesses, 20 minutes from here in Toronto, not Canada. And they are a uniting church. And the uniting church, decades ago in Australia, the Methodists and Presbyterians joined and became the uniting church. And they're very, very focused on community and helping community. They've got a lovely church in quite a open place, thousands of cars drive by every day, like your Adventist church that was a shell doing nothing all week. But you drive by and you see stuff happening. They've got a little shop next door where they sell secondhand clothes and books and things. There's a little cafe. There's a counselling section at the back. There's people coming in and out all the time. There's a lovely little church where they have their weekly programs. And a lady is a minister there, a pastor is a lady. And I often just think these guys are free of a unique kind of Adventist problem. Has that been your experience too, where you can see a lot of the other Protestant movements, the Salvation Army, the different movements? Yeah, they've got problems, they've got politics, they've got all of this stuff, but they don't have this unique problem that whenever they are helping people, there's a big push from the hierarchy and leadership to say, and don't forget the numbers, don't forget to witness
Oh
and
yeah.
bring people in. I'm just interested on your thoughts on that, in the sense of, is that one reason, do you think, why some people leave the Adventist church and go on to do great humanitarian things unencumbered by the 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 restraints of the Adventist ideology?
Well, yeah, and Peter, I'd agree. I think what I experienced in my time in World Vision, dealing with Christians of all, like you said, one of my best friends was from the Salvation Army. That's where he had come from into World Vision. We could sit down there and talk and have a great time and hang out and do all sorts. There was you never got the impression that he was about converting people.
Yeah, I guess that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I know you never got the impression, never,
No.
that it was, they were happy. They would have been happy if we would have showed up on their doorstep, going to their church. My family and I,
Yeah.
but they were very, they were very, very that. And a pastor where the church where I attend now, he's trying to set up a nonprofit group because he doesn't feel the church will support him.
Yeah.
Where we do those sort of things. And so we met a couple of weeks ago, and there was a lady there from another church that he knew, and we were talking, and this was her story that she told. She said, I got tired of sitting in the pew doing nothing. So what we decided to do, I was working with a charity organization with the homeless, and one of the things they needed was a shower truck where homeless people could come in and get a shower.
Wow.
And so she said, well, we looked at the price. This was her personally. This is not church, not, anybody church or whatever.
Yeah.
Her person. She goes, we looked at this showering truck, And it cost $90,000. And I said, I really feel like the Lord wants me to do this. So the lady put down enough to get this truck, but
Wow.
she didn't have enough to cover $90,000. And the Lord covered the $90,000.
Yeah.
And she said, I feel really good because now we have a service we can provide to people.
Yes.
And
And
I'm
look,
just not sitting in the pew
yeah.
doing nothing.
Yes.
I'm actually doing something to help. And it's
Yeah.
like, okay, what next? And you begin to learn to trust the Lord more and more. Say, okay, if the Lord did this, then, maybe the Lord should listen to the Lord a little more. And, maybe this will happen and this will happen and this will happen and this will happen.
And you know what? I think the pushback that you and I may be doing today, by simply raising some of these issues, is not to say, oh, we're bagging the Adventist church because they do this and they don't think about that and all they care about is proselytizing. No, that's not what we're saying, or myself anyway. We're just saying, hey, think about this. If you were less focused on proselytizing, maybe you'd have a deeper, more impactful ministry and connection with the community. It doesn't mean throw it all away, you're all idiots. It's not that at all. It's just, I think, and Ellen White talked about this. She says in a famous quote, agitate, agitate, agitate. To young people studying in one of the Adventist seminaries or whatever, she was saying that you need to ask questions, you need to agitate. And I know that she herself in Kurrendong, when she was living here for about 10 years in the late 1800s, there's a book written about the many things that she did in the community. There are people and families to this day that their ancestors were involved with Ellen G. White, and there was letters backwards and forwards that have been found from these local ancestors to Ellen White, and she was all about trying to fix people's plumbing. Someone had a roofing problem. She was great doing that. So when you criticize Ellen White, that doesn't mean you don't also acknowledge the good stuff. And I guess one of my challenges is trying to encourage people to be open to dissidents speaking into a conversation and on topics, while also saying, yeah, there's great things as well. And finding that balance can be quite difficult.
Here's another. This is from the Andrews University Department of World Missions. It was written by Rudy Meyer, who's a good friend of mine. Rudy used to be president, CEO of Adler International.
And it's called One-Sided Christianity, is it?
Yeah, One-Sided Christianity, an appeal for mission that heals a lost and broken world. And it's a lot of good stuff that we've been talking about that's there. I don't usually, I'll do this quote from Mrs. White. This is from Christian Service, page 92. The world must be warned of the soon coming of the Lord. We have but little time in which to work. Years have passed into eternity that might have been improved in seeking first the kingdom of God and his righteousness and in diffusing the light to others. God now calls upon his people who have a great light and are established in the truth, having much labor bestowed upon them, to work for themselves and for others as they have never done before. Make use of every ability. Bring into exercise every power, every entrusted talent. Use all the light that God has given you to do others good. Do not try to become preachers, but become ministers for God. And too often we become preachers.
Yeah.
We don't become ministers.
Yes. Yeah.
That's the sad thing that I think we don't do a good job at.
Yeah. Every week on Thursday, 5:30 p.m. your time and 12:30 lunchtime New South Wales time, Australia, we have a gospel presentation. Right. And I'm loving it because it's an organic community growing up within this kind of boisterous, robust, often at loggerheads SDAQ&A community. It's a community within that that's rising up, that just wants to look at the gospel, teachings of Jesus. What did he do? How did he help people? How can we mirror that? How can we learn from that to make our lives better? And Connie French is speaking for us tomorrow. But what you've got me thinking of today is, I wonder if we in that group can somehow also help communities as a group within the bigger group. And so I'm excited. Some ideas are starting to percolate of what we might be able to do as a group with just helping some other people, in on the online community or in different ways. So that's an exciting thing that's come from this conversation.
Yeah, I think there's lots of things that if churches would pick up and do, and somehow there was some linkage, some coordinating body, you could see a lot of good work
Yeah.
could take place in how you deal with helping everybody.
Yeah.
And again, it doesn't. It shouldn't be, well, I'm going to go help all those poor dumb people wherever because they don't know what's going on, all that. And help your neighbor. Just do something
exactly. Exactly.
Just,
it's not rocket science, and it doesn't take
right.
much coordination or much money.
Right.
And we get 400 people every week watching the program within a program. You've got my mind ticking over now of how we can maybe do something as a community.
Let me show you another book real quick.
Yeah. And then I just want to just switch directions just completely for a minute. And don't forget, if there's things that you've written down, bullet points that you want to say, I want you to get to them. So don't leave anything out.
Here's a book that I read this year that I think would be very good. It's from a Christian author. It's entitled "The Gospel Comes with a House Key: Practical, Radical, Ordinary Hospitality in Our Post-Christian World" by Rosaria Butterfield.
Oh, I love it. Can you maybe later on send that to me in Messenger, and
Sure.
I will find it and put some links in the description below.
Sure. It's a wonderful book, reading how she and her husband used their home in a sort of like an Acts 2 community.
Yeah.
And brought people to Christ that way.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that's
I love that.
I think if from the Heritage Adventist side of the church, if we want to continue to go down that route, we'll probably turn out to be like the Amish.
Yes.
Everybody will look at us and say, "Oh, it's cool. See what they do,
how they live their life, yeah.
How they live their life."
And
they're really whatever. But
yeah, and it's interesting. The people who tell me to stop rocking the boat and are often the progressive Adventists, because the traditional Adventists or Heritage Adventists, they're quite strong in their knowledge that they're winning and they're prevailing and they're growing in leaps and bounds. And for some reason, the more progressive Adventist just wants me, the head in the sand thing again. They just stop rocking the boat. It's making me feel uncomfortable. But I think they should feel a bit uncomfortable. And I think, unless they do something, the Ted Wilson, this is me talking, not you, I'm not putting words into your mouth, but the Ted Wilson style leadership is going to prevail and win and last a lot longer than they anticipate, and have quite a detrimental effect on the people, how people see Adventism.
Well, but Peter, what I would say, and I've heard you discuss this issue before, and I guess in defense of Ted, I have a very good friend who's she's the most wonderful woman, motherly figure in my life that I've had since my mom's died. And when we talk about church issues, every once in a while, and she would be in the Heritage Adventist
right
area, she always tells me, when we talk about it, she goes, Chris, Ted Wilson is God's anointed.
Yeah.
And just like David didn't kill King Saul when he had a chance. And so don't say anything bad. You can't say bad things about Ted Wilson because he's God's anointed. And I'm like,
yeah.
Amen. I get it. So you're never going to hear me say something bad about Adventist leaders because, yes, whether you like it or not, God has appointed them to leadership positions for some reason. I don't know why. But
I might disagree with you on that one, but I hear what you're saying.
That's fair. I fully get that, but I mean, it's.
And I guess what I'm speaking to is a general sense of I see the progressive liberal wanting less of that kind of leadership, but I just see them saying it without really. Look, I don't know. Maybe there's a heap of stuff going on I don't know about, but I just see that kind of leadership winning. And if you're right, because you may well be, that they're there for that specific reason, for this specific time, and it's meant to be that way, I pull my head in, and we'll soon find out. And maybe,
but Peter,
either way, any of that however that happens or unfolds, at least we're having dialogue. I think that's the key.
Yeah, and Peter, what I would say, I'll morph into now more what I was thinking about, what I've heard you when you said this, where the gospel Adventists and what they can do. The trick is the gospel Adventists have never organized into a money group in the church.
Yes, that's true.
The Heritage Adventists have through ASI, through ABN,
100%.
Through all that side of the church. That's where the money side is. And so, if I guess I remember you saying something about once when Neil Wilson was there picking up that he could get $1 million if he picked up the
right.
call.
Yeah.
Okay, they can do that.
Yeah.
I've watched it happen. I know who those guys are that were the millions of dollars.
Yeah.
I've asked those guys for millions of dollars.
Yes. Yeah.
And I know where it resides and all that's all there. The gospel Adventists on the other side have never created a parallel organization.
Yeah.
That has money in it too.
Yeah.
And is willing then to fund.
Yeah, money talks.
Certain things within the church, and money talks within the church, and we've seen it happen in scandals in the church.
Yeah.
But we've also, I've seen some of the money that they do a lot of good work.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of good stuff, money that comes out of ASI projects.
Oh, yeah.
That they do all that stuff. But that gives them, in essence, a voice inside the church to say,
yes.
This is really the direction we should go.
Yeah, 100% agree with that.
Because
I wonder why that is. I wonder why. And we're just, I'm getting pushed back lately for these categories, but loosely speaking, the liberal, progressive, gospel Adventist isn't. I've often said the traditional Adventist is monetized, networked, and organized. What is it about the more gospel-focused, liberal, progressive Adventists that stops them from being coordinated and organized? Because what kept me in the church was they were telling me they were, and they were being more so. And then when I pushed back on that, I eventually found out they weren't. It was just hope.
Yeah, because they don't want to trust the church with the money, the big money.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I mean, we're talking. I know there was one Adventist donor who was an ASI guy, one of the main ASI guys.
What's ASI stand for?
Adventist Layman Services, Adventist Industry Layman, Adventist Layman Industry Services, or something like that.
Where lay people of the church help fund.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I know this one gentleman. I met him on a few occasions. You know, he sold his company for, I think, over $240 million, and he was pumping millions into the church.
Wow.
And they were doing health projects. It was a global pioneer project. You know,
Yeah, amazing.
good stuff. I mean, it was good stuff. They were getting baptisms. They were getting all that stuff. But I don't think the liberal side, if the money's there, they're going to trust the church.
I've never thought of it that way before. Thank you. I like learning new things.
They might trust, like, I know, like, what is it? The Southern California Conference.
Right.
That's the more liberal one.
Yeah.
They might give them money for something.
Yeah.
But I doubt
why then don't they, like the traditional Adventists have all sorts of independent ministries where they're letting their money go where they want it to go? Why don't the more liberal progressives have their own independent ministries even?
That's a good question. It would be an interesting answer. I once interviewed for a job where they told me, Chris, your job is if you get this job, Chris, your job is to figure out how to get that liberal side of the church money.
Wow.
Because the conservative side of the church money is already tied up.
Right. How can we get the other guys? Yeah.
How can we get the other guys? Which I think what they were probably saying to me is that I was more liberal.
Yes.
than I was conservative.
How can you help us appeal to these guys? I love how. Sorry.
That argument. It was like, I think it was more because you've had experience outside the church and in the Christian world, you can frame the argument for money better than.
Yes.
But
we can use your
magic skills. Yes.
But
no, Peter, I would say I think I think the liberal gospel side, whatever, I think they eventually walk away.
Yeah. And I just think it's sad. Like, and when I cajole them, which is a lot of what I do is not to be mean, I'm just kind of having a little bit of a fun, not fun. I don't mean like that, but just, just a bit of lighthearted, you guys aren't real Adventists and this kind of thing. And they genuinely are up against that, where I'm being a bit playful, but I just think it's sad because a lot of the liberal progressives inject so much enthusiasm and color and excitement, and they have inquiring minds, and they love looking at things philosophically. And I think it's sad that they don't coordinate in some way, because they're such a blessing to the church, but they often just walk away, feel suppressed, marginalized. But when you then say, well, why don't you push back? Oh, don't rock the boat, mate. I don't get that.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen too much on the ASI side of the church.
Yeah.
That sort of wing of the church, and it's a different. You go to those conventions when if you're a fundraiser, and it's just like there's like 5 or 6 that are really the big ones,
right?
And depending on where they sit, it's like moths to a light. Everybody's there, it's like they got to convince them that, give me and I'll change the world, and I'll bring you more of this and I'll bring you more of that. And it's just like,
wow. They might even enjoy the power that they have over. Anyway,
I don't want to think about that.
No. Let's not go there. Let's not go there. That's me being too much of a dissident. I was just to add before you want to change it. I always thought it was interesting that the Adventist Church has benefited millions of dollars from one of the worst food products ever created in Little Debbie's. Yeah. That's hilarious.
And I know my dad went to school with the people who started that up and worked in the plant and all the rest. But it always amazed me that, it was the worst of the worst. I remember when we would go to meetings in America, and I would take some of my staff along with me. They would gravitate to this stuff because they knew about it.
Yeah.
And you're like, that is the worst of the worst.
Yeah.
I wouldn't feed my dog,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But anyway, you wanted to move
but I don't want to get off any bullet points you've got. So make sure you
think,
don't leave anything unsaid. But we've had a couple of comments come through. But I also wanted to just go back to your dad for a moment. And something I don't think we touched on, but if we did, please let me know. I'll just bring up onto the screen again a picture of your dad from the SDA Encyclopedia of Seventh-day Adventists.
Yep.
And here he is, 1932 to 2018. I encourage people to go and check that out. But I'm interested in what his thoughts were. Where was he? What was going down in his mind? Where did he sit politically, academically, philosophically, theologically around the Glacier View issue? Where was he when Des Ford took the famous October 29, 1979 forum meeting? Where was he during was it August 1980 Glacier View? Where was he post all of that when everything exploded?
And I have to look up, I have to get his diary located.
It might even be a fully complete whole other interview we do, but
he was from what I understand, he was present at the meetings. And
so he was at Glacier View, or you mean this forum meeting?
No, he was at Glacier View.
Wow, I didn't know that. So, boy, that would be interesting.
Sure.
That would be very interesting if he did write some diary entries on that.
I remember that I saw one. There was a comment from Dr. Johnson, which I said where he and my dad went to visit the Fords in San Francisco. Maybe I know Jillian Ford is there. I don't know if she remembers that visit or knows more about that visit or what took place, but I remember Dr. Johnson saying that he and my dad went there. Well, the one comment I can remember was it was a challenge. It was a challenge that the church is going to have biblically. It wasn't. He was not a theologian. Again, he was a historian, a American historian. He wasn't a theologian. Smart guy, but he wasn't a theologian. I think he saw the problems like other Adventist theologians saw that were there in that room or there afterwards.
Yeah, I didn't want to put you on the spot there, but I thought I wonder.
He went on to like the geoscience trips, and went and the Geoscience Institute that you read about in Dr. Valentine's book, and I know that he wasn't. Well, I guess what is it? The young Earth creationist, or no?
Right.
What's the 6,000-year one?
Yeah, I think they're the young Earthers.
I don't think he was a young Earther.
No.
Let me put it that way. When we lived in two houses when we lived in Berrien Springs. One was on Greenfield Drive, and our neighbors were Dr. Harold Coffin, if you remember the name from that book.
Yes.
So it was always interesting as a kid, when we would play as neighborhood kids and we'd end up at their house. He might have some stuff going. So it was interesting that he had some stuff, but no, I don't like. my dad had his, I think he knew what he believed in, and he also knew that you couldn't say much. You had to say it in certain ways.
Yeah, good point.
You couldn't come right out and say, because if you read the article on Jane Andrews, it's not going to come out like he's critical, but he's going to say enough that if you're smart enough,
you're going to read between the lines. Yes.
And one of the questions on that I always asked him with his business card, I always said, Dad, why do you never put PhD like everybody else puts on your business card?
Yeah.
Because he said, well, if people aren't smart enough to know that I have a PhD by what I say and what I do, then they don't. A card ain't going to help them.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think every Adventist administrator that studies certain issues has a choice to make on their career and their beliefs.
Yeah.
And if they know that they're making a difference in the lives of their students in their ways, then they're going to do what they can to sort of survive. I know my dad, sometimes I regret the choices he made for profession. He had a chance to teach in 1961. He had the choice to either go to CUC or to go to the University of Cincinnati as an adjunct professor of history.
Wow. Boy, that's a sliding doors moment.
And his PhD mentor, who was a very famous historian in the field, had worked it out for him. And he chose to go to CUC.
Yeah.
In some regards, I wish he had never done that in his entire life.
Would have been a different life for you.
Would have been a different life, everything would have been different. I know I can share this about me personally. When it was time for me to go to college, I really didn't want to go to Andrews University. I really didn't want to go to Andrews University.
Wow.
I told them that I would be happy to go either to West Point, the military academy, or I would be happy to go to the University of Notre Dame, which is like 20 miles south. It's a good Catholic institution.
Why didn't you go there?
And as I said at the beginning, I'm a proud graduate of Andrews University.
Yeah.
I don't think that it's just decisions you got to make when you're a kid in the Seventh-day Adventist Church and your parents are employed by it. I don't think there's enough thought about to the kids that have grown up in the environment like I did, like you did, like others have done, with the pressures surrounding them, with their parents and jobs, and it's a fishbowl when you live in those environments. Yeah. Everybody looks at you, and everybody, if you do one little thing wrong, did you know so and so, and that could hurt down the road for a job.
Yeah.
If what you want to do.
Big time.
Really be a challenge.
It's big time.
And I don't know. That's the best I can say. I decided to do what I did, and like I said, I'm a good son.
Yeah. Were there ever moments where you thought, you know what, I think I would be best served not being a Seventh-day Adventist? Some people have asked in the questions, are you still an Adventist? And I'm pretty sure you are.
Well, I would say, Peter, I'm I'm on a journey still. I do go to church, depending on who's preaching on some Sabbaths at my church, because I know who I like to listen to and I can put up with, and I can know who I don't like to listen to, and don't want to sit through 53 Ellen G. White quotes to the process. I don't want to do that. I can tell you, and I mean, again, this is probably more than what I thought. And I've always been of the mind throughout my Christian life of looking at listening to other people, reading other things, being there. So I think that's rounded me as a Christian, and maybe at times it's made me not your traditional SDA.
Yeah.
I can tell you for the last probably 10 years, because I've done leadership classes, I've done all that, I will read this book every year.
What is that one? It's mirror imaged again.
In the Name of Jesus, Reflections on Christian Leadership by Andre J.M. Neumann.
Right.
There you got a Catholic priest who was gay.
Wow. The author of that book.
Yeah. But
Catholic and gay.
Yeah. And I've developed, I use his book, and I've developed a leadership model based on his book.
Right.
Books.
Yeah. That's another one. I'd love you to send me the title, and I'll try and find a link, and I'll add it in the description. A lot of people write to me and say, can you please add a link to books in the description, because sometimes they're driving while they listen and they can't pull over, and then they can't find it later. So if you could,
here's another book that I've read that I love. I read it many years ago. I read it off and on regularly. It's called Dakota, A Spiritual Geography by Kathleen Norris. And she talks about how the land affects our spirituality.
Wow.
And so like when I mentioned before, Mauritania to me was a spiritual geography time in my life.
Yes. Yeah.
Because I was out in the middle of a desert. I was in a place where I quite honestly could barely speak French. I mean, it was very basic French.
The geography greatly impacted your experience.
Experienced my, it wasn't there. Every Martin Luther King Jr. holiday, I will read, because it's my favorite sermon from him, a drum major, and I will read the letter from the Birmingham jail.
Yes.
I had another friend who mentioned, you should watch this pastor. You'll like him. You'll like this. And it was a wonderful series on Isaac and Jacob. Totally not SDA. I know your guest last night was talking about Seventh-day Baptist.
Yeah.
Quite honestly, on a Sabbath morning, if I'm not going to church, I will listen to a Seventh-day Baptist church that I found in the U.S., and then I will listen to a Seventh-day Adventist church service.
Yeah.
Now, the difference between the two is like night and day.
Yes, that's interesting.
Of course.
How so?
You don't hear, you hear the gospel. If you're a Seventh-day Baptist, you hear the gospel. You don't hear Mrs. White.
Yeah.
You just, you hear how to live with your Christianity in your day-to-day life.
I love that.
Whereas an Adventist, depending, you might get, fully SD, you're going to get Ellen G. White potentially. You're going to get,
yes,
three angels' messages. You're
It's
going
going
to
to
get,
seep in there somewhere.
yeah.
Where, that's one of the things I've been really loving about our weekly gospel hour programs. I'm learning so much because I guess I didn't realize how much I had been marinated in Adventist theology and Adventist gospel, and you don't realize how different the two gospels are. What would you, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but it people don't like the dividing the church into categories, but because I have had so much to do since about 1983 with other denominations because of music, and I've gone to their church services, and I've had a really big understanding in Australia and New Zealand anyway of the dynamics of their politics because I've gone to all the different denominations with the music. Um, and I don't see, while I see different kinds of Baptists, and I've said this many times before, a Baptist going to a new town, if the Baptist church they're not really that keen on, they'll go to the Uniting Church or the Episcopalian or Anglican or whatever and fellowship there. So Adventists have a unique denomination. But what is it within that denomination that I often see as being divided? How, and generally speaking, we talk about your father even and those in those days of Des Ford where they couldn't totally speak their mind. They had to speak in code because they were speaking to one kind of Adventism and not wanting to upset another kind. And we can define it perhaps as traditional Adventist and progressive Adventist or whatever way people want to call it. But how would you define the two? What differentiates them? Because they seem way more clearly defined as different to these other denominations that have divisions and opposing sides, and it's a different thing altogether. Within Adventism, it seems to me that there are these two groups that have pushed back against each other for decades and decades and decades. How would you see them as being defined and different? What's the line in the sand between the two of those?
Well, I guess, Peter, I'd try to answer the question this way. When my dad and I would talk about it, and when I was in my 20s and 30s, he would come up and we would talk about that there were different Adventist churches around institutions. So all the churches around the General Conference that had General Conference employees and those sort of things acted in a certain way. They had to, lock, stock, and barrel. They were going to be the heritage style Adventists because that's the way they were. Then you had at the university level, you had a different church outcome there. And I think you've had like Harvey Benaisi say, the Sabbath school class that he attended, it allowed for a little bit different sort of way things work. You might have different music at church services. You might, all sorts of things could be a little bit different. Then I think you had the churches that were around the healthcare system. And they were, I think, they were driven maybe more in the heritage way because the doctors that staffed them at the time, that were more prevalent, were probably more on that sort of bent. And then the final church was always the church that was sort of by itself out in the hinterlands, the hinterland church, where nobody maybe had gone to college or university. It was a totally different sort of milieu on what happened. My dad was not a Seventh-day Adventist when he first went to Southern Missionary College.
Oh, really?
He was a Methodist, had been baptized in the Methodist Church,
Your
and
dad?
yeah, and became
Wow.
an Adventist only at the first fall week of prayer at Southern Missionary College. My grandmother had converted, but my dad hadn't. His dad had died when he was 2 years old, so he was sort of brought up
Oh,
by himself. Um, Now, my mom's side of the family, we always do the generational thing. So, my dad's side, I was third generation. My mom's side, I was fourth generation. They live up in a little small town, or used to live up in a little small town in northwest Wisconsin. There are there might be a stoplight. They have one of the very few Seventh Day Adventist burial grounds. My dad wrote an article about it for the Lake Union Herald, which is basically, when I ever visit there, it's like, oh, that's Uncle so and so, and that's Aunt. That's you go through that whole sort of thing. The church they attended was a wonderful church. It was almost a family-run church from them up there. Potlucks had a wide variety of food that other potlucks in the Seventh-day Adventist Church would raise their eyebrows at. I'll put it that way.
yes, yeah.
It was just not. They were much more concerned about loving each other. There
Just
was
getting
none of
on
it.
with it.
Yeah, it was just there was life, because they couldn't get into all the the esoteric theology arguments that could be there. I mean, they wanted to be good people, live good lives, and do good and help people, and bring more babies in the world, and go die up on a hill. Go get buried up on a hill.
Yeah.
And hopefully, and Jesus was going to come, and they would all be together as a family.
Yes.
I mean, someday that's probably where I'm going to be buried, truth be told. I just think, that's sort of, you go from those differences in how you actually operate as a Seventh-day Adventist Christian.
Right.
Because I know I have many good friends that would be considered on the heritage side, that, like we were talking before, they go out of their way, they help their neighbor, they do all this sort of stuff, but they just believe a certain way.
Yeah.
And they're not going to change. Now,
Yeah.
do I love them any less? No, but do they love me any less? No, but
Yeah. That segues into a question from Moto Sapien. He says, Chris, what is your opinion on the SDA University East Coast versus West Coast theology debate?
East Coast, West Coast, U.S., I'm assuming?
Yes, and I'm not sure. I'm not au fait with the
I'm
different...
not sure. I'm not sure what debate they would be talking about, but I always know that everybody considers Andrews, the liberal university. Southern was always considered the most conservative, one of the bunch.
And is Southern on? So tell me which sides of the coast those are.
Well, Southern's in Tennessee, so they're south. So
okay, so they're not even east-west.
I don't know how that would sort of play into it, and La Sierra PUC is always, those guys are way out there.
Yeah, and they're West Coast.
They're West Coast.
So who's on the East Coast?
So it used to be Atlantic Union College, but that got shut down. CUC turned into Washington Adventist. I think they might be a little more on the liberal side. I don't know. I mean, my dad in 1976, he had been voted to be president of Walla Walla University. So we went out on a trip, and my mom didn't go. They wanted me to go because I was going to be going into academy. So they wanted me to feel comfortable with the whole thing. So we flew out there, and he was ready to become president of Walla Walla. And I think Walla Walla would have provided him the opportunity to do something without the General Conference sort of control looking over his shoulder on everything. And then, you know how church works. Before you know it, he was president of Andrews University, and Dr. Hamill was director of education at the General Conference.
Wow.
And I'll let the scholars figure that one out.
Yeah. Hal Southwell wrote a little earlier when we were talking about a desire for the church just to be transparent. And he suggested that honest and transparent church administration would possibly cause a complete collapse of the organization.
That definitely could be a possibility. I don't. I mean, I think, it's hard. On the other side of it, I look at it from Elder Wilson's standpoint.
Yeah.
It is hard to run an organization the size that the church has grown into and get everybody moving in at least maybe the same direction.
Yeah.
I think the church model, again, I know, going back to how the founders founded the church and the organizational structure they set up, maybe that was not the right sort of approach to take at some point. And then you start reading, what took place in 1888, what took place in 1919, what took place in 1922, what took place in the 50s with the questions on doctrine, and then what was happening in the 60s and 70s with Adventist universities. I mean, there are all options along the way that the church could have said, hey, let's rethink everything.
Yes, 100%. And they never have really. They've stuck to the
party
line. Yes.
Party line. Yep.
Yeah. Trail Rider writes, this is Marie, I think it's Marie, where I mentioned some positive things about Ellen White. And she said that once I get past the deep pain level, I'll be able to see her more that way too. Right now, it's just a deep feeling of betrayal. And I think too, what I was saying there is that you can hold those two in tension. I too feel that betrayal. And I want to acknowledge people that are watching that do have a deep sense of betrayal from the Adventist Church. That's a valid feeling, and supported by demonstrable evidence and empirical data. And so, yeah, please share that pain. It's totally fine.
No, I absolutely understand, and
I resent people. Yeah, and I resent people who say, "Oh, stop talking about this stuff. Oh, you're banging on about it. Come off it." Like, people have got valid reasons for talking about it, and it's okay to talk about it. And I'm just saying that, yes, but by doing so, it doesn't mean that you're bagging those who decide to stay or bagging those who have found a home and a place there. I think those two need to be weighed in a healthy balance eventually. Barb T writes that she spent many Sabbaths searching high and low for quarters or coins for ADRA. And ADRA has certainly done incredible things around the world. Yeah.
I see there was one question, I think it was from Motor Sapien. When was my dad offered Walla Walla? That would have been in 1976.
Oh, okay. Right.
No, Peter, when you look at Christian humanitarianism in general, the big boy, of course, was World Vision at over 1.2 billion.
Incredible.
It's probably grown since that happened. ADRA is probably an intermediate player. They're probably somewhere between 200 to 400 million. nowadays. And when I was with the American Refugee Committee, we were around 50 million. So we were considered more of a boutique niche sort of organization. Again, we were secular, and the other two were Christian, of course. No, it was Adler does a lot of good work. World Vision does a lot of good work. That doesn't say that poverty is ever going to go away from us. But the point is there's lots of need out there, and whether the need is your next door neighbor or in the next country over, it's going to be there. I know the way that the U.S. is going right now with the incoming administration and some of the things they're talking about and doing. And as a Christian, I think a lot of people are going to need to read the letter from the Birmingham jail a few times.
Yes. We need to highlight that and encourage people to go and check it out. Yeah, I'll try and get a link for that too.
So I think those are going to be a lot of challenges. But no, I think as you grow older, at least in my journey, I think you grow more forgiving.
Yes.
And you grow more
less.
You don't major in the minor.
Yeah.
I'd rather minor in the major. I mean, everybody in this world has pain of some sort.
Yeah.
And we've got to acknowledge. I mean, they might not have a job. They might be facing cancer. They might be facing, who knows what. I mean, you're facing the death of your father-in-law.
Yeah.
My mother-in-law, bless her heart, died the day before Hurricane Milton hit us in Florida. Here.
Yeah.
And my wife has, said to me in the last couple of days, there's every once in a while that she's going to pick the phone up and call her mom to talk to her.
Yeah.
And then she realizes she can't do that anymore.
Yes.
And
sad realization.
And so that's where I think we as Christians need to be more loving. I mean, again, love God, love your neighbor.
Yes. Come back to that again and again.
It's to get the glacier viewpoints, and you have to jump all around Scripture and this. I mean, it's like, come on.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been very clear. I mean, when you read the sheep and the goat story, I mean,
yeah.
How much clearer does it have to be?
Yeah, I've often said that there's a kind of quagmire of an Adventist, almost side forest that you kind of go into, and people do eventually maybe find their way to the gospel.
And I know pastors have told me in the past, well, Chris, in the Adventist church, everything's still local, and we can still do local stuff, and the general conference isn't totally. Well, then do stuff local.
Yeah.
Figure out how to do stuff local. Talk together as Adventist pastors and figure out how to make a difference in people's lives.
Yeah.
Motivate your churches to do that good work.
Yeah. I agree. Man, it's been so good chatting with you today, Chris.
It's been good.
I'd love to have you back. I'm going to let you have your last word, because I wanted to say where to from now for Chris Smoot, and please give us your last closing thoughts.
Well, I'll do this. I'll read. My dad, when we lived in Africa, my dad wrote 73 stories to his grandchildren.
Oh, wow.
And he would send these stories, bedtime stories. What do you call
Like
them?
original stories of his own.
Oh yeah, original stories of his own.
Oh, are they available in a book for people to have access to?
Everybody said, Chris, write them up, get them in
Yes,
the
you
book.
must.
And I do that. And then when I told Dr. Valentine about them, he goes, wow, that might be kind of interesting. And I'm like, okay, I will. And so this was one that he wrote. I'm not sure what the number was, but it was entitled A Moment in Time, which was a series, Stories from My Grandchildren, Master of Disguise. And I'll get into the paragraph here, just a few paragraphs. But he's talking about Jesus. It is clear that except for his mom and dad, no one else knew his real identity. It is understandable that no one in town recognized his special gift. It is safe to assume that no one thought he had much to offer. After all, there was no reason to think that anything special could come from Nazareth. But in the midst of the mundane, there he stood. In the monotonous routine of daily life, there he lived. In the dust and the dirt and the despair, there he was. No sign proclaimed his true identity. No announcement made from the street declared his mission. No notice placed in the town square called him a prophet or son of God. But he was there, and the people knew him best missed him. They looked in the wrong places. They did not know that he would live among the poor, learn a trade from his father, listen to his mother tell him of the miracle of his birth, or develop special healing abilities that later made him famous. Not much has changed in over 2,000 years. We still seek him where he is not found. We look for him in the most obvious places at the most obvious times. He is not there. If you want to find him, you will have to get dirty. You will have to look in the hospitals and the hospices. Search for him in the schools, the daycare centers, and the orphanages. You may find him in a soup kitchen serving food to the hungry,
Amen.
in the jails among the criminals, or in the shelters of the homeless. You may find him talking to a bum on the street, nailing a rafter at the construction site, or taking a meal to a senior citizen. He will not look like you think he should. He will not act like it either. But do not let that stop you from looking. For if you decide to do so, it will be the most extraordinary journey of your life. Looking for him in America might be one place, but you will look for him halfway around the world. You have chosen to search for him in Africa. He said that you should go into the world to preach the gospel. He wants you to give healing to the ill, food to the hungry, learning to the illiterate, and hope to the people who live their lives in despair.
Wow, that is so good. You've been lucky to have a dad like yours who has been so able to share his thoughts and views, and and I think encouraged you to be your own person. Ultimately,
he was. I have never lived up to his ability as a writer. He could write. He could write something that would come out perfect the first time.
Incredible. Basically, was he like that? Was he like that if he spoke unscripted?
He didn't speak unscripted. He rarely. He would. He really thought he was. He was from the Winston Churchill School of Public Speaking.
Yeah.
Where he wrote everything out and then he memorized it. That's what he always told me. He goes, Chris, if you ever preach, you write out what you do, you memorize it, and then you stand up there. You have your paper, but you deliver it
as if it's
as if it's coming from left.
Yeah, that is a gift. That is a gift. A gift.
And
a gift. And a gift. 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 A gift.
Oh, now it's running.
A gift.
I lost the sound there on you, Peter. I will just say, I don't know. Can you hear me, Peter? I'll just say, you're a musician. I will tell you another little thing about him. His mother was a piano player, piano teacher. She taught piano. And he never took a lesson, but he could basically sit down at the piano, and if he had heard a song, he would play a few bars here and there, and then before you know it, he had the whole song out and ready to go. He was a master class musician, and I'm just lucky to have him as my dad. Same with my mom. I know I haven't talked a lot about my mom, but she was a blessing too. And anyway, I know there's problems with the sound here, and
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Oh, good. Yeah. We could still hear you. There was something went wrong with my device over here, kept rebooting. Fascinating about what you were saying there, though, about the piano. And we haven't even touched on your mother's skills.
And so, it was a. I said, I was a lucky kid. I grew up in a wonderful place. I had wonderful friends. Still do. There's about 12 or 14 of us that have gone to school since kindergarten and first grade that we still stay in contact. I mean, I saw one here at a wedding we just went to here in Florida. And I know the church has its challenges and it has its problems, but it also has a lot of good people that are there. A lot of people who love Jesus. A lot of people who are looking forward to his coming. And our journeys all go in the direction that God intends for them to go. And some of those journeys might be with the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Some of those journeys might not be with the Seventh-day Adventist Church. It might be in another church. But we're all on a journey.
We're all on a journey. Yeah. And I think we're all here to kind of support each other on this journey. Yeah. Thank you, Chris Smoot. What a great conversation. I hope those watching have enjoyed it as much as I have. And encourage you all to join our little gathering tomorrow, same time as we started today, but tomorrow with Connie French for our gospel hour. And I'm all revved up and excited to think about things that we can maybe ponder to help community in new and profound ways with our little burgeoning group. Is that what it's called? A little tribe within a tribe. So, Chris, thank you so much. I very much look forward to having you on again. And
no problem.
I did this thumbs up thing before, and I got all this kind of not doing it now. I can't recreate it, but I suddenly got behind me all these fireworks. I don't know if you saw that, but I got a lot of comments in the chat there. So yeah, Sapien said, give us a double thumbs up for effect. I'm trying. It's not working this time, Motor Sapien. But thank you, Chris. Say hi to your wife. I'd love to.
I'll do that.
Time. And how old are your kids now?
My kids they're in their early 30s, mid 20s. I have 4, 3 girls and a boy.
Oh, fantastic.
I have the last 2 are twins and
oh wow.
And
identical twins?
Fraternal
twins. Yeah. Wow.
And they are the joy and love of my life.
How old are the twins?
Now you're putting me on the spot so I can do math.
They're the mid-20s ones.
27. They went over to Bangladesh when they were 7 weeks old.
Wow.
We took them. We flew Thai Airways, and shout out to Thai Airways. Anybody who flies Thai Airways, when it was time for us to have meals, my wife and I, the babies somehow disappeared. We never worried that they would be taken because, where can you go on an airplane at 35,000 feet? But the air flight attendants, that were all lovely, they just cooed over the kids, and it was all the greatest thing since entire world. And then if we went to Thailand for ADRA meetings, I learned, my limited Thai is Thao Fang means twins in Thai. So we'd be walking down the street, they'd be carrying on the front, and
very intrigued by twins.
Thao Fang, Thao Fang, Thao Fang.
Wow.
You'd hear this sort of thing go all the way down. Yes, my kids were, most American kids, if you ask them what their favorite foods would be, at least 3 of them would say, we like Ethiopian food the best. We don't like Mexican, we don't Italian, we like Ethiopian. That's what we like. So Ethiopian and maybe Egyptian would come in there.
I have tried Egyptian. But
no, they mostly grew up, overseas, and it was I was glad. I hope that when they're their dad's age, that they look back and they were like, that was really the best times of our lives, and we're glad Dad followed God's calling and did what he did.
That's great, and good point to leave it. Thanks so much for today, and I will look forward to chatting with you again, Chris. Until next time.
Okay. Till next time, Peter.
Live long and prosper.
Live long and prosper.